The Art of Persuasion, Influencing Others with Integrity. Written and published by Transform Audiobook. Introduction. There comes a moment in every life when we realize that words are more than sounds. They are bridges or barriers. Persuasion isn't about control. It's not about bending others to your will. It's about something much deeper, something sacred. It's about connection. It's about influence that honors both yourself and the person standing before you. This audiobook, The Art of Persuasion, Influencing Others with Integrity, is not another guide to tricks, tactics, or manipulations. It's an invitation to master the powerful, invisible language that shapes relationships, careers, love, trust, and even your destiny. True persuasion doesn't shout. It doesn't shove. It whispers to the heart. It listens before it speaks. It moves not through force, but through understanding. It is an art, not a weapon. Over the course of this journey, you'll discover the timeless principles behind authentic influence. You'll step into the stories of people who learned, sometimes painfully, that real persuasion begins with integrity, empathy, and emotional clarity. And as you listen, something will awaken inside you. A quiet confidence, a deeper presence, a voice that no longer trembles in doubt, but stands firm in truth. We'll explore how to speak so people listen, how to listen so people open up, how to inspire action without pressure, and how to align your words with the deeper values that make persuasion not just effective, but transformational. By the time we reach the final chapter, you won't just understand persuasion. You'll live it, with honesty, with grace, and with a sense of power that no one can take from you. Let me ask you something. What would your life look like if every conversation you had left both you and the other person stronger? Let's find out together. Chapter 1. The Quiet Power Beneath the Words. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes the softest voice in the room carries the most weight. You may be wondering, what makes some people instantly magnetic, while others, even with all the right words, seem to disappear into the noise? It's not the volume of their voice. It's not their polished speeches. It's not even their credentials. It's something you can't quite see, but you can feel it. It's presence. It's emotional truth humming beneath every word. Let's begin with a story. I remember the first time I truly understood this. I was sitting in a crowded conference room. The air was stale, the lights too bright, the kind of place where attention drifts and yawns hide behind coffee cups. One by one, speakers took the stage. Confident, polished, loud. And yet, 5 minutes after each talk ended, their words evaporated like mist. Then she walked in. She was small, almost fragile looking. Her clothes were simple. Her notes were handwritten, trembling slightly in her hand. No microphone tricks. No flashy slides. Just her, and the truth she carried. When she spoke, the room changed. Not louder, but deeper. It was as if every heart leaned in at once. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pound her fist. She didn't try to impress. She simply was. Authentic. Grounded. Present. Her voice cracked once or twice. She smiled awkwardly when she lost her place. And still, no one looked away. Why? Because she wasn't performing. She was connecting. She wasn't trying to persuade us. She was letting the truth persuade itself. Here's the truth. People don't respond to perfection. They respond to presence. You don't have to sound brilliant to move someone's heart. You just have to show up, fully. Not hiding. Not pretending. Not defending. Your real power lies beneath the words you say. It's in the energy you bring into the space between you and another soul. It's in your ability to mean what you say, without needing to prove anything. And this is where true persuasion begins. Not with strategy, not with manipulation, but with integrity of presence. When you embody your message, when you feel the truth of it vibrating in your bones, you don't have to push. You pull. Naturally, effortlessly, beautifully. People are drawn to those who are congruent, whose words and emotions are not at war. whose presence feels like a place they can rest inside, even for a moment. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the people you trust most. The ones who could ask you for almost anything, and you would lean in to listen. Was it because they had all the right arguments? Or was it because, deep down, you felt they were real? Felt, not thought. That feeling is the heartbeat of persuasion. And it starts, not with talking, but with being. Being present. Being clear. Being willing to be seen. Even if your voice shakes. Even if your heart races. Even if your hands tremble. Because presence speaks louder than any words ever could. Let me ask you something. The next time you're in a conversation that matters, will you try to impress them? Or will you dare to be with them? There's a world of difference. And that difference is where your power lives. Emotional and practical takeaway. The first step to mastering persuasion is mastering your presence. Speak less. Feel more. Stand inside your own truth and let your presence do half the work. The world doesn't need more perfect speakers. It needs more present souls. And you're about to become one of them. Chapter 2. The invisible strings that move us. Have you ever noticed? Sometimes the decisions we think we're making freely were gently shaped long before we even realized it. You may be wondering, how do some people seem to plant ideas into others' hearts, without ever pushing, without ever forcing? The answer is subtle, almost invisible. But once you see it, you can never unsee it. It's called emotional framing. And it is the hidden language of persuasion. Let's step into a real story. It happened on a gray, cold morning in New York City. The kind of morning where the sidewalks gleam with thin ice, and every breath feels like glass in your chest. A violinist stood at the entrance of a crowded subway station. He wasn't just good. He was extraordinary. The kind of talent that silences the world when the first note rises into the air. And yet, almost no one stopped. Hundreds walked past, eyes glued to their phones, shoulders hunched against the cold, coins rattling in their pockets, untouched. Only a few children tugged at their parents, wanting to listen, but the parents hurried them along. That man was Joshua Bell, one of the finest violinists in the world. Just days earlier, he had played the same music in a sold-out concert hall. Seats had cost hundreds of dollars. People had dressed in their finest clothes, applauded until their hands ached. Same man, same music, same brilliance, different frame. Here's the truth. It's not just what you say or do that matters. It's the frame you set before you say or do it. Frames are invisible emotional contexts. They whisper to people's unconscious minds. This is important. This is urgent. This is valuable. This is safe. Frames tell people how to interpret what they experience, before logic even gets a chance to speak. Let's pause for a moment. Think about a job interview. If you walk in feeling desperate and apologetic, you unconsciously set the frame. I am here hoping you'll approve of me. But if you walk in calmly, grounded, aligned with your own value, you set the frame. I am here to see if we are the right fit for each other. And the energy changes everything. The questions shift. The respect deepens. The outcome tilts in your favor, long before the actual conversation even unfolds. Here's where real persuasion starts to work its quiet magic. It's not about talking people into things. It's about inviting them into a frame where your truth already makes sense. It's about leading their emotions gently, without manipulation, without deceit. It's about building a bridge, not forcing a leap. You may be wondering, how do you create powerful frames? It starts inside you. Before you enter any conversation of influence, ask yourself, what emotional frame do I want to create? Do I want them to feel safe, curious, inspired? Or am I grounded in that feeling myself? You cannot invite someone into a frame you are not already living in. If you are anxious, they will feel anxious. If you are skeptical, they will resist. If you are centered and trusting, they will soften. It's not magic. It's emotional resonance. Your state of being sets the frame before a single word leaves your mouth. Let me ask you something. If you knew you could set the emotional tone of every important interaction you have, how differently would you prepare yourself before stepping into the room? What would you choose to carry inside you? Hope? Calmness? Strength? Joy? Remember, influence begins invisibly, not with what you say, but with what you embody. Emotional and practical takeaway. Before you speak, frame. Before you persuade, resonate. Set the emotional context by living it first. When you master framing, you won't have to push people toward your ideas. They'll naturally walk toward them, because it already feels right inside their hearts. And that is persuasion at its purest form. Before we continue, if this story is opening your eyes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. It helps us reach more hearts ready to awaken. Your support means more than you know. Chapter 3. When words become bridges. There's a moment in every conversation that truly matters. When you feel the tension in the air, the invisible question hovering between two hearts. Can I trust you? Will you understand me? You may be wondering, why do some conversations open people up like flowers to sunlight, while others leave them wilting in silence? It's not just the words. It's the bridge those words create. And that bridge is built on emotional connection. Let's step inside a story. It was late. The kind of late where even the city lights seemed tired, flickering against the velvet black sky. I was sitting across from a friend I hadn't seen in years. Time had pulled us onto different roads, different beliefs, different worlds. We circled around small talk, safe topics, careful laughter. But the distance between us stayed heavy. And then, without warning, the conversation cracked open. He spoke about the loss he had hidden, the heartbreak he had never shared, the failures that haunted him in the quiet hours of the night. And for a long moment, I said nothing. I didn't offer advice. I didn't fix. I didn't redirect. I just stayed with him, inside his words, inside his pain. And slowly, a bridge was built between us. Not of cleverness, not of solutions, but of presence. He didn't need my brilliance. He needed my being. Here's the truth. Persuasion isn't about getting people to think like you. It's about making them feel felt. When someone feels deeply seen, when their emotions are honored without being judged or hurried, their defenses melt, their hearts open, and inside that sacred space, real influence is born. Not through force, but through trust. Let's pause for a moment. Think about a time when you opened up to someone. Maybe it was about a dream, a fear, a mistake you rarely admit. Now think about how the other person responded. Did they rush to give advice? Did they change the subject? Did they make it about themselves? Or did they sit with you in your vulnerability, without needing to fix it? Which response made you feel safe? Which one deepened the bond? Exactly. Connection, not correction, builds the bridge. You may be wondering, how do you build that kind of bridge in your everyday conversations? It's simpler and harder than it sounds. You listen, truly listen, not to reply, but to feel. You let go of the urge to be right. You surrender the need to win. You honor the emotion behind the words, even if you disagree with the logic. Because here's the thing. People don't always need you to solve their problems. Most of the time, they just need to know they're not carrying the weight alone. And when they feel that, when they sense that you are a safe place, their hearts lean toward you. Their minds follow naturally. Because trust is the soil from which all true persuasion grows. Let me ask you something. What would happen if, the next time you faced resistance, you stopped pushing and started listening? With your heart wide open? What bridges could you build then? How many locked doors could you gently open? Emotional and practical takeaway. The fastest way to influence someone is to understand them first. Before you try to change someone's mind, let them feel that their heart matters to you. Because once you build the bridge, the crossing becomes inevitable. Chapter 4. The Echo of Empathy. How to make people feel understood without saying much. Sometimes, the deepest conversations are the ones where almost nothing is said. You may be wondering, how can silence, or just a few gentle words, speak louder than the most passionate speeches? The answer lies in the hidden language of empathy. The kind of empathy that doesn't perform. It echoes. It lingers inside someone long after the conversation ends. And it changes everything. Let me take you inside a moment I'll never forget. It was years ago. A rainy Tuesday afternoon. The kind that soaks into your bones. I was visiting a woman named Claire, a counselor known for working with grief and loss. As I sat in the corner of her dimly lit office, I watched her meet with a young man whose life had shattered. He had lost his brother. Suddenly, violently. He spoke haltingly, choking on guilt, anger, unbearable sadness. There were no easy answers. No tidy solutions. And Claire didn't try to give him any. She didn't fill the silence. She didn't reach for cheap comforts. She didn't even say much at all. She just sat with him. Her body leaned slightly forward. Her face open, soft, present. Her eyes filled with a tenderness that needed no translation. And as the minutes stretched on, the young man, without even realizing it, sank deeper into the safety of that space. He cried. He raged. He unraveled. And still, she stayed. When he finally looked up, tears staining his face, he said something I will never forget. He whispered, "I don't know why, but it feels like you understand." And she simply nodded. No words needed. Here's the truth. Empathy is not a performance. It's not about having the perfect response. It's about being willing to feel with someone. It's about becoming a mirror. So their pain, or joy, or hope, can see itself, and not feel so alone. When you offer this kind of empathy, you don't just influence someone's mind. You heal something deeper. You reach a place logic can never touch. And when that happens, trust blooms. Real, soul-deep trust. And once you have trust, influence flows naturally. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the last time you felt truly understood. Not just heard. Not just tolerated. But felt. What was different about that moment? Was it someone's eloquence? Or was it their presence? Chances are, it was the echo of empathy you remember. The way they're being said, "I see you. I'm with you. You're not alone." You may be wondering, how can you create that kind of echo in your own conversations? It begins with slowing down. With letting go of the frantic need to fix or explain. Instead, listen. Listen with your whole body, your whole heart. Notice what's beneath the words. The sigh hidden inside the story. The tremble hidden inside the anger. The longing hidden inside the laughter. Speak softly. Ask gently. Reflect what you hear without judgment. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, "I hear you." Or, "That sounds really hard." Or even just silence, and the steady warmth of your presence. When someone feels seen without being analyzed, when they feel heard without being hijacked, their defenses fall, their spirit relaxes, and the door to real persuasion quietly opens. Let me ask you something. What if your greatest strength in communication wasn't your cleverness, but your willingness to sit inside someone else's experience without running away? How many walls could you melt? How many hearts could you reach? What could you build? If you stopped trying to be impressive and started being present? Emotional and practical takeaway. Empathy is not about agreeing. It's not about surrendering your truth. It's about offering a safe mirror, a reflection that says, "I'm with you in this moment. You are not invisible." When people feel that from you, they listen differently. They respond differently. They trust differently. Because true empathy doesn't just touch the mind. It echoes inside the soul. And that echo is the beginning of real, lasting influence. Chapter 5. Speaking to the heart. Why facts alone never change minds. There's a dangerous myth that floats through our culture. A myth that says, if you just show people the facts, they'll change. You may be wondering, if that were true, why do smart people hold on to bad ideas? Even when the evidence is overwhelming. Why do arguments filled with logic so often fail to persuade? The answer is simple. And it's devastating. Because facts don't change hearts. And if you don't change the heart, you don't change the mind. Let's slip into a story. I once knew a man named Daniel. Sharp, analytical, brilliant. He believed in facts like some people believe in prayer. When his teenage daughter started making decisions that scared him, running with a rough crowd, skipping classes, slipping away from the bright future he had envisioned, Daniel went into battle. He gathered statistics, articles, expert opinions. Every night at the dinner table, he laid them out like weapons. Proof after proof after proof of why she needed to change her path. And every night, she withdrew a little further. Her face hardened, her heart closed, until one night, she didn't come home. She ran. Not because she didn't understand the facts, but because she didn't feel understood herself. Daniel lost not because he was wrong, but because he forgot the first rule of influence. People don't move because you flood them with information. They move because you touch something deeper. You speak to the aching, trembling, invisible parts of them. The parts logic can never reach. Here's the truth. If you try to lead with facts alone, you will almost always find resistance. Because facts trigger the brain's defenses. The ego rises up, ready to argue, ready to protect its old beliefs. But if you speak first to the heart, if you acknowledge the fear, the hope, the longing underneath the surface, the mind starts to open. Softly, willingly, because the heart, once moved, leads the mind where it needs to go. Let's pause for a moment. Think about a time when you changed a deeply held belief. Was it because someone buried you in evidence? Or was it because someone reached you? Through a story? Through a feeling? Through a moment where your heart said, "This makes sense. This feels right." We are emotional creatures, long before we are rational ones. And influence must honor that truth. Not manipulate it, but honor it. You may be wondering, how do you speak to the heart without becoming manipulative? It starts with sincerity, with a real desire to understand, not conquer. You speak with stories instead of statistics, with vulnerability instead of superiority. You say things like, "I can imagine that must feel overwhelming." Or, "I've struggled with that too." You find the shared human experience inside the conversation, and you weave your facts into that story gently. After the heart feels safe, you don't attack beliefs. You invite curiosity. You don't shame people for being wrong. You honor the journey they've been on. And slowly, the heart relaxes. The mind opens. Change becomes possible. Let me ask you something. The next time you're tempted to argue with someone you care about, will you lead with a battle of facts? Or will you offer them a bridge of feeling, and let the facts walk across it later? Because hearts don't respond to battle. They respond to belonging. And when you give someone the feeling of belonging, their whole being becomes ready to listen. Emotional and practical takeaway. Facts are powerful, but feelings are primal. When you need to persuade, speak first to the emotion underneath the surface. Honor the human before you correct the idea. When the heart feels safe, the mind follows naturally, and your influence will no longer be a struggle. It will be an invitation that no one wants to refuse. Chapter 6. The Power of Questions. How to Guide Without Pushing. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say isn't a statement at all. It's a question. You may be wondering, why do questions soften defenses, when statements so often sharpen them? Why do great leaders, mentors, and persuaders seem to guide people effortlessly, without ever forcing them? It's because questions unlock the part of the mind that feels free. And freedom is the soil where real change grows. Let's walk into a true story. Years ago, I met a teacher who had a reputation for reaching the unreachable students. Teenagers labeled as troubled, disrespectful, hopeless. While other teachers lectured louder, assigned more punishments, tried to impose control. She did something radically different. She asked questions. Simple ones. Unexpected ones. Gentle ones. Instead of barking orders, she would tilt her head slightly and say, "What's going on with you today?" Or, "What would help you feel safe enough to stay in this room?" Or sometimes, simply, "What's the hardest thing you're carrying right now?" And slowly, kids who had built walls higher than mountains lowered them, bit by bit, not because she demanded obedience, but because she gave them the one thing they weren't used to being given: respect for their own inner world. By asking, she handed them the keys to their own doors, and they chose to open them. Here's the truth. People will fight your commands, but they will embrace their own discoveries. When you ask questions instead of delivering conclusions, you invite people to think for themselves. You create a space where their pride, their dignity, and their autonomy remain intact. And that space is where lasting persuasion happens. Let's pause for a moment. Think about a time when someone tried to force you to change. Maybe it was a boss, a partner, a parent. How did it feel? Now think about a time when someone asked you a question that made you stop, made you reflect, made you realize something for yourself. Which moment felt more powerful? Which moment led to real movement inside you? Exactly. Questions unlock the heart, because they offer freedom, not force. You may be wondering, what kinds of questions create real transformation? Here's a few that master persuaders use naturally. What matters most to you about this? What are you hoping for deep down? What fears are holding you back? What would it look like if it all worked out? Notice these questions don't corner people. They open them. They shift the focus inward, toward emotion, toward hope, toward vision. And when people articulate their own hopes and fears, they move themselves toward change. Because now, it's their journey, not yours. Let me ask you something. The next time you feel the urge to convince someone, could you pause and instead ask a question? What would happen if you trusted their heart to find the answer? Instead of hammering it in, what new doors could open? If you became the guide instead of the guard? Emotional and practical takeaway. When you want to influence someone, don't rush to push. Pause to ask. Questions preserve dignity. They invite curiosity. They turn resistance into reflection. And reflection is the secret path to real, voluntary change. When you master the art of asking, you'll find that persuasion stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like an invitation. A journey people choose because it feels like their own. Chapter 7. The Art of Listening Between the Lines. Real listening is not about hearing the words. It's about hearing what lives beneath them. You may be wondering, how do some people seem to understand you, even when you can't find the right words yourself? It's not magic. It's not mind reading. It's the art of listening between the lines. And it's one of the rarest and most powerful skills a persuader can master. Let me take you into a moment that changed everything for me. It was a cold afternoon. A young man sat across from me at a coffee shop, hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup he barely sipped. He spoke in clipped, controlled sentences, talking about a job opportunity he was considering. The risks, the logical pros and cons. On the surface, it seemed like a straightforward decision. But there was something, a tremble in his voice he tried to hide, a hesitation in his hands, a flicker of fear behind his carefully constructed words. If I had only listened to the facts, I would have missed everything that mattered. But I didn't. I leaned in, felt the weight in the spaces between his sentences, and asked softly, "What's the real fear here?" He froze, blinking hard, breath catching, and then, slowly, the truth poured out. It wasn't about the job. It was about a deep, silent terror of failing, of disappointing his father, of proving, once again, the story he secretly believed about himself. That he wasn't enough. Here's the truth. People rarely say what they mean at first. They say what feels safe. They layer their real emotions under logic, politeness, or bravado, because it's terrifying to lay your soul bare. If you only listen to the surface, you'll miss the invitation underneath. And persuasion, real persuasion, happens when you respond not to the words, but to the heart behind them. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the people who have truly changed you. The ones who reached you when no one else could. Did they just parrot back what you said? Or did they listen deeper? Did they catch the silent cries tucked inside your careful explanations? Chances are, they listened with their whole being. They caught what wasn't being said, and honored it with compassion. That's the kind of listening that changes lives. You may be wondering, how can you start listening between the lines? Here's the path. Slow down. Stop planning your next response. Drop beneath the noise of your own thoughts. Notice tone more than words. Notice hesitation more than certainty. Notice what's being avoided, what's being said too quickly, or not at all. And when you sense something stirring under the surface, gently, respectfully, invite it forward. You might say, "It sounds like there's something heavier underneath that. You seem hesitant. What's going on for you there? I get the facts you're sharing, but what's the feeling behind them?" And then, stay. Be patient. Don't rush to fix. Don't rush to fill the silence. Because silence is where the truth gathers its courage to speak. Let me ask you something. What if, instead of trying to impress people with how much you know, you amazed them with how deeply you understand? How would your relationships shift? How would your influence expand? Because when people feel you truly hear them, when they feel you listen to what they can't say, their trust in you becomes unbreakable. And trust is the real currency of persuasion. Emotional and practical takeaway. Don't just listen to people's words. Listen to their pauses, their sighs, their silences. Listen to the tremble behind the certainty, the hope behind the anger, the fear behind the laughter. When you do, you will stop talking to their defenses and start speaking directly to their soul. And that changes everything. Chapter 8. Mirrors, not windows, reflecting people's truths back to them. Most people are walking through life blindfolded, not because they lack intelligence, not because they don't want to see, but because seeing yourself clearly is terrifying. You may be wondering, why do people cling to broken stories about who they are? Why do they resist the very truths that could set them free? It's because looking directly at yourself is like staring into a blinding sun. It burns. And that's where you, the true persuader, come in. Not as a window, pointing to what they should see, but as a mirror, gently reflecting back who they already are. Let's step inside a story. There was once a woman named Elise. For years, she struggled with self-doubt. Not the obvious, loud kind. The quiet, corrosive kind that eats away at dreams silently. She built walls of competence around herself. Awards, promotions, applause. But inside, she still whispered to herself that she was never enough. One evening, sitting across from an old mentor, she confessed it. Expecting advice. Expecting encouragement. Expecting a blueprint for fixing herself. But the mentor didn't offer advice. Didn't offer a plan. He simply smiled, leaned forward, and said, "Elise, do you have any idea how much strength it takes to carry the burdens you've carried and still show up with this much heart?" That moment shattered something inside her. Not in a destructive way, but like a heavy shell finally cracking open to reveal something beautiful underneath. For the first time, she glimpsed herself, not through the distorted window of fear, but through the clear mirror of someone else's compassionate reflection. And that glimpse changed everything. Here's the truth. People don't need you to lecture them into transformation. They don't need you to shove reality down their throats. They need you to reflect back the truth, with so much tenderness, that they have the courage to look for themselves. And when they see it, when they recognize their own beauty, their own strength, their own potential, they change. Not because you forced them, but because you help them remember who they are. Let's pause for a moment. Think about a time someone truly saw you. Not just your mask. Not just your achievements. But the trembling, messy, radiant truth inside you. How did it feel? Liberating. Terrifying. Healing. Maybe even all at once. Because being seen, really seen, is the deepest human longing. And also the deepest human fear. When you offer someone that gift, without judgment, without agenda, you create a transformation that no argument, no fact, no clever persuasion could ever match. You may be wondering, how do you become a mirror for others? It begins with your heart posture. You must drop the need to change them. You must let go of the urge to fix, to diagnose, to prescribe. Instead, you listen. You honor. You reflect. You say things like, "What I see in you is a strength you don't even recognize yet." It sounds like you're carrying more than you let others see. The courage it takes to keep moving, even when you doubt yourself, it's breathtaking. You hold up the mirror of compassion, and you let them see their own reflection. When they are ready, let me ask you something. What if your influence wasn't about leading people toward your vision of them, but helping them see the highest version of themselves? How many lives could you awaken? How many hearts could you heal? Because persuasion, at its purest, is not about getting people to become who you want them to be. It's about helping them become who they were meant to be all along. Emotional and practical takeaway. Be a mirror, not a window. Don't point at what people should see. Reflect what is already true. With gentleness. With love. With unwavering belief in their worth. When you do, they will walk toward their own transformation. Not because you pushed them, but because you reminded them that they were never broken in the first place. Chapter 9. The gentle strength of boundaries. Leading without losing yourself. Persuasion, at its deepest level, is a dance between connection and self-respect. You may be wondering, how do you stay open to others without losing yourself in the process? How do you influence hearts and minds without betraying your own? The answer lies in a paradox. True connection requires clear boundaries. Boundaries that are not walls, but invitations. Not demands, but declarations of self-worth. And mastering this balance is what separates manipulative persuasion from transformational influence. Let me tell you a story. Her name was Marisol. She was one of the most empathetic, magnetic people I had ever met. People were drawn to her warmth, her generosity, her fierce loyalty. But beneath that glow was a hidden exhaustion. She gave, and gave, and gave, until there was nothing left for herself. She said yes when she meant no. She comforted others while her own heart ached. She said the right words to keep the peace, even when her soul was screaming. And eventually, she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way a river dries up under a relentless sun. When I asked her, much later, what happened, she said something that lodged itself in my heart forever. I forgot that protecting my spirit was part of loving others too. Here's the truth. Without boundaries, your influence becomes an illusion. Because if you sacrifice your truth to win someone's approval, you haven't persuaded them. You've abandoned yourself. And nothing built on self-abandonment can last. Real persuasion, the kind that changes lives, is rooted in wholeness. It's rooted in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that your worth is not up for negotiation. Not even for love. Not even for acceptance. Not even for influence. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the people you admire most. The ones who radiate quiet authority. Who seem to hold space for others without losing themselves. They don't bulldoze others. They don't disappear into others. They stand. Firm. Gentle. Clear. Their boundaries don't push people away. They create a sanctuary where real trust can grow. Because when people know where you stand, they can lean on you without fear of falling through. You may be wondering, how do you set boundaries without becoming harsh or distant? It starts with remembering this. Boundaries are an act of love. For yourself, and for the other person. You can say, I care deeply about you, and I also need to honor what's true for me. I want to support you, and I also need time to recharge so I can show up fully. I respect your perspective, and here's where I need to stand firm. Notice the tone. Firm but kind. Clear but compassionate. No blame. No shame. Just truth. Spoken from a rooted heart. Boundaries, when done with love, are not rejections. They are invitations into a healthier relationship, built on mutual respect. Let me ask you something. Where in your life have you been giving away pieces of yourself in the name of being persuasive? Where have you been bending so far that you no longer recognize the shape of your own soul? What if your greatest influence could come not from how much you give away, but from how deeply you stand inside yourself? Emotional and practical takeaway. Persuasion without boundaries is manipulation or martyrdom, but persuasion with boundaries is leadership. When you honor your truth, when you protect your spirit, you become a lighthouse, steady, visible, unshakable, and from that place, people find you. They trust you. They follow you, not because you demanded it, but because you modeled it. And that is influence that lasts. Chapter 10. The space between words, how silence strengthens your influence. There is a language more powerful than any words you could ever speak. You may be wondering, what if the most persuasive moments aren't created by what you say, but by what you leave unsaid? In the spaces between your words, in the pauses you allow, lives the quiet force that moves hearts more deeply than any speech ever could. Because silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence. Let me take you into a story. A woman named June had spent her life negotiating contracts, deals, high-stakes conversations where every word was measured like gold. Early in her career, she believed that success came from filling the air with words, convincing, explaining, overcoming every objection before it had time to form. She was good at it, but something was missing. People agreed with her, yet somehow, they didn't feel truly moved. Their yes was often cautious, tentative, easily broken. It wasn't until one difficult afternoon, sitting across from a client who was visibly struggling, that she stumbled onto something that changed her forever. He hesitated. Words tangled in his throat. She felt the urge to jump in, to fill the silence, to rescue him with clever reassurance. But something, maybe intuition, maybe exhaustion, made her stop. She stayed quiet, soft, present, and in that silence, something miraculous happened. The man spoke, not the polished, defensive words he had prepared, but the truth, raw, unguarded. He admitted fears he had never said aloud. He exposed hopes he had hidden even from himself. And when he finished, he whispered, I don't know why I'm telling you this. I guess I finally feel heard. June realized then, it wasn't her words that had made him open. It was her silence, her willingness to hold space without rushing to control it. Here's the truth. When you speak without pause, you don't give the other person's soul time to respond. You create noise, not connection. But when you embrace silence, when you trust the spaces between your words, you give people room to breathe, room to think, room to feel themselves. And inside that room, trust is born. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the conversations that changed you. The moments when something real finally broke through the surface. Were they cluttered with noise? Or were they wrapped in a sacred kind of stillness? Silence, used with intention, tells people, I am not here to overwhelm you. I am here to be with you. It honors them. It honors the moment. And it magnifies the power of every word you do choose to speak. You may be wondering, how do you use silence without feeling awkward or losing control of the conversation? It starts with a shift in your mindset. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence. When you pause after a powerful question, when you let a meaningful statement hang gently in the air, You are telling the other person, I trust you to meet this moment. You are inviting them to step into ownership, to reflect, to speak from a deeper place. And that ownership is what turns passive listeners into active participants. Here's a simple but life-changing practice. The next time you ask an important question, or offer a heartfelt insight, pause, count to 3, slowly, in your mind. Hold the space open, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if you're tempted to rush in, because often, the words that come after that sacred pause are the ones that matter most. Let me ask you something. What would happen in your conversations if you stopped trying to fill every silence and started trusting it? What new truths might emerge if you simply waited and listened and allowed the other soul to step forward in their own time? Because influence isn't about how much you say, it's about how deeply you invite. And silence is the most profound invitation there is. Emotional and practical takeaway. Don't fear the space between your words. Honor it. Use silence not as a weapon, not as a manipulation, but as a sanctuary. A place where truth can rise, where hearts can breathe, where real persuasion, the kind rooted in freedom, not force, can finally unfold. Because sometimes, the loudest thing you'll ever say is nothing at all. Chapter 11. The energy you carry. Why people believe you before they hear you. Long before you say a single word, long before your voice cuts through the air, people have already decided something about you. You may be wondering, how is it possible that someone can believe or distrust you before you even speak? It's because persuasion isn't just about communication. It's about transmission. You are always transmitting something through your energy, and people feel it, whether they realize it or not. Let's step into a story. There was a man named Theo. Theo was brilliant, in the traditional sense. He knew how to craft the perfect arguments. He could cite studies, statistics, historical examples like a master. But every time he tried to rally a team behind a new idea, something strange happened. People nodded politely, agreed on the surface, and then did nothing. The ideas died quietly after the meetings ended. Confused and frustrated, Theo sought advice from an old mentor. The mentor listened patiently to Theo's complaints, and then asked a single devastating question. Theo, do you believe in what you're saying? Not just in your mind, but in your gut. Theo hesitated. For the first time, he realized. He didn't. He doubted. He feared. He hesitated inside. And that hesitation leaked out through every gesture, every pause, every vibration of his voice. And people felt it, even if they couldn't name it. Because energy speaks, before language ever does. Here's the truth. People believe your energy, before they believe your words. You can have the perfect speech, the flawless presentation, the most convincing arguments. But if your energy carries fear, if your energy carries doubt, if your energy carries manipulation, they will feel it. And they will resist you, even if they can't explain why. Because we are wired, biologically, emotionally, to tune into the feeling behind the form. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the moments when you felt naturally drawn to someone. It wasn't just their words, was it? It was something underneath. Something you felt immediately. Confidence without arrogance. Passion without pressure. Authenticity without agenda. Their energy said, you are safe here. You can trust me. This is real. And that opened you. It always starts there. You may be wondering, how do you shift the energy you carry into your conversations? It begins before you ever open your mouth. You must first check your own heart. Do I believe in what I'm about to say? Or am I grounded in sincerity? Or am I speaking from fear or from love? If you are anxious, desperate, controlling, pause, breathe, recenter, because persuasion that flows from desperation is rarely persuasive, but persuasion that flows from calm certainty is magnetic, not loud, not flashy, Just steady. True. Unshakable. Here's a simple but powerful practice. Before an important conversation, close your eyes. Imagine the energy you want to carry into the room. A calmness, a confidence, a curiosity, a compassion. Let it fill your body first. Let it settle into your breath, your heartbeat, your presence. And then walk into the conversation, already radiating what you hope to inspire. Not performing it, being it. Because energy is contagious. And you will set the emotional temperature of the room, whether you intend to or not. Let me ask you something. What would happen if, instead of obsessing over the right words, you obsessed over the right energy? What would happen if you trusted that the way you be in a room was already doing half the persuading for you? Because people are not changed by perfect scripts. They are changed by presence, by the felt sense of truth, by the resonance of a soul standing fully in its own light. And when you carry that energy, words become secondary. Influence becomes effortless. It's not about what you say. It's about what you are. Emotional and practical takeaway. Before persuasion begins, energy begins. Before words move a mind, presence moves a heart. Align your energy first. Speak second. And watch how the world leans in. Not because you demanded attention, but because you became the kind of soul who naturally commands it. Chapter 12. Earning the right to be heard. The foundation of authentic influence. In a world filled with noise, words are cheap. You may be wondering, how do you rise above the noise? How do you become someone people want to listen to? Not because you shout the loudest, but because your presence alone demands attention? It starts long before you open your mouth. It starts with how you live. Because real influence is not granted by charisma. It's earned by character. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Gabriel. He was not flashy. He didn't have a silver tongue. He didn't dominate conversations. Yet when he spoke, people leaned in. They listened, not just with their ears, but with their whole bodies. At a time when trust was scarce, Gabriel's influence grew like a quiet flame in the dark. One evening, a younger colleague asked him, half in awe, "How do you make people listen to you like that?" Gabriel smiled. Not smugly, but softly, knowingly. He said, "I don't make them listen. I live in a way that makes my words worth hearing." He explained that every conversation, every act, every choice outside the spotlight was a deposit into a bank account called trust. And when you consistently live with integrity, when your actions align with your words, when your respect for others is not a performance but a way of being, then, when the moment comes to speak something important, you are already standing on a mountain of credibility. You don't have to fight for attention. You don't have to push. People want to listen because they trust you, not just your arguments. Here's the truth. Persuasion does not begin when you open your mouth. It begins with who you are when no one is watching. It's built in the small moments. A keeping promises others forget. A speaking kindly when no advantage is gained. A standing by your values even when it's inconvenient. A listening when you could dominate. A admitting mistakes when pride tempts you to hide. Every small act of integrity becomes a silent amplifier for your future words. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the voices you trust most in your life. The ones you would follow without being asked. Is it because they are the loudest? The most polished? The most persuasive? Or is it because, deep down, you believe in their character? You trust their motives. You trust their heart. You trust that their words and actions are stitched together by the same thread. That trust was not built in a single conversation. It was earned over time, brick by brick, moment by moment. And when they speak now, their words carry the weight of everything they have lived. You may be wondering, how do you start earning that kind of influence? It's simpler and harder than it seems. You live aligned. Aligned between what you say and what you do. Between who you are in public and who you are in private. You treat every small moment as sacred. Every conversation as a chance to either strengthen trust or quietly weaken it. You apologize when you fall short. You forgive when others fall short. You build relationships like gardens, with patience, care, and daily tending. And eventually, your reputation speaks louder than your voice ever could. Let me ask you something. What if you lived every day as if you were already earning the right to be heard? What would shift in your words? Your actions? Your presence? Because influence is not something you seize. It's something you become worthy of. And once you are, no one can take it from you. Emotional and practical takeaway. The true foundation of persuasion is not technique. It's trust. And trust is earned, not demanded. Live in a way that makes your words powerful, even before you speak them. Because in the end, it's not the volume of your voice that matters. It's the integrity of your life that makes people listen. Chapter 13. Persuasion as Service, leading others toward their own strength. At its highest form, persuasion is not about bending others to your will. It's about lifting others toward their own power. It's not about winning. It's about serving. You may be wondering, how can influence and service exist together? Aren't they opposites? Not when you understand real persuasion. Not when you realize that the deepest power you have is to awaken the power sleeping inside someone else. Let me tell you a story. There was once a coach named Ray. He worked with young athletes, many of whom came from broken homes, hard streets, places where hope was not a given but a rare miracle. Other coaches shouted, commanded, dominated. Ray did something different. He saw. He looked into each young face. And he searched for the spark hiding underneath the fear, the anger, the bravado. He didn't just tell them what they could become. He treated them as if they already were it. He spoke to the champion inside the dropout, to the leader inside the loner, to the greatness inside the forgotten. And one by one, the boys rose. Not because Ray demanded it, but because he believed it before they could. He didn't push them into someone else's idea of success. He called them into their own destiny. Here's the truth. True persuasion is never about overpowering someone. It's about reminding them of the strength they forgot they had. It's about becoming a mirror, a catalyst, a midwife for the rebirth of their own belief in themselves. When you approach persuasion as service, the entire energy of the interaction changes. It's no longer me versus you. It's me, with you, for you. And that shift is where real transformation begins. Let's pause for a moment. Think about someone who lifted you, not by flattery, not by manipulation, but by seeing you, believing in you, before you had the courage to believe in yourself. How did that change you? How did it alter the way you saw your own life? That is the invisible, unstoppable force of persuasion as service. It doesn't dominate. It doesn't impose. It awakens. You may be wondering, how can you step into this kind of influence? It begins with your heart posture. You must care more about their growth than about your ego. You must be willing to release your agenda and instead tune into what is truly best for them. You must ask yourself before every important conversation, am I here to prove myself or to serve? Am I trying to control or to empower? Am I speaking from fear or from love? When you choose service over self-protection, when you choose to lift rather than to win, you step into a power that cannot be faked and cannot be resisted, because people can feel it, and they are drawn to it like flowers turning toward the sun. Let me ask you something. What if every conversation, every act of persuasion, was really an act of service? How would your tone change? Your posture? Your intentions? What new possibilities would open between you and the people you hope to reach? Because when you lead others toward their own strength, you are no longer just influencing minds. You are awakening souls. And there is no greater power than that. Emotional and practical takeaway. The highest form of persuasion is service. When you focus not on what you can get, but on what you can give, you create the conditions for trust, for growth, for real transformation. Lead others not toward your vision of them, but toward the highest, bravest version of themselves. And you will find that the influence you build this way will outlast arguments, tactics, and even time itself. Because when you lift another soul, you change not just a moment, but a life. Chapter 14. The integrity of influence. Why true persuasion leaves people stronger. There's a kind of persuasion that leaves people smaller, weaker, dependent. And there's another kind that leaves people taller, stronger, more themselves than they were before. You may be wondering, what's the difference? What makes one kind of influence a form of control, and the other a gift of freedom? The answer is simple. It's integrity. And integrity is the soul of true persuasion. Let me share a story. There was a leader named Marcus. He led a team through crisis after crisis. Economic downturns, internal failures, public scrutiny. Other leaders around him crumbled under pressure. They tightened their grip. They ruled by fear. They tried to extract loyalty through manipulation. But not Marcus. When his team faltered, he didn't shame them. He didn't threaten them. He met them with unwavering honesty and unwavering belief. He told them the truth, even the hard truths. He invited their voices to the table. He made them feel like owners of the solution, not victims of the problem. And because of that, they rose. Not just for him, but for themselves. They became stronger leaders, stronger humans. And Marcus? He didn't just leave behind a successful project. He left behind a legacy of people who had discovered new strength inside themselves. Because true influence never takes away from someone's power. It multiplies it. Here's the truth. If your persuasion leaves people feeling smaller, more confused, more dependent on you, you haven't influenced them. You've weakened them. Real persuasion honors a sacred truth. Every soul you touch deserves to leave the encounter stronger, not smaller, more aligned, more awake, more whole. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the people who have changed your life in the best ways. The mentors, the friends, the unexpected guides. Did they make you feel less capable? Did they make you doubt yourself more? Or did they plant something stronger inside you? A belief, a courage, a sense of possibility you hadn't dared to claim before. That's the mark of persuasion with integrity. It's not about leaving fingerprints on someone's mind. It's about lighting a fire in their spirit. You may be wondering, how do you make sure your influence strengthens rather than diminishes? Here's the compass. Always ask yourself, silently, before speaking, is what I'm about to say rooted in respect? Will this help them stand taller? Am I leading them toward freedom or toward dependence? Choose words that lift, that open, that affirm the other person's agency and dignity. Use influence to reveal their strength, not to replace it with your own. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of persuasion is not convincing someone to follow you. It's empowering them to trust themselves. Let me ask you something. What if you measured your influence, not by how many people agreed with you, but by how many people grew stronger because of you? How would your conversations shift? How would your presence deepen? Because real leaders, real persuaders, don't create followers. They create leaders. And that is influence that echoes long after the words are forgotten. Emotional and practical takeaway. True persuasion leaves people stronger, not smaller, not dependent, not fearful. It leaves them more themselves, more awake to their own wisdom and power. So speak not to impress. Speak to awaken. Influence not to control. Influence to empower. Because when your persuasion lifts others higher, you don't just change their minds. You change their lives. Chapter 15. Speaking the unspoken. How to name what others feel but can't say. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do for someone is to give voice to the truth they have no words for. You may be wondering, why does it feel so breathtaking when someone says aloud what you've been feeling all along, but were too afraid, too tangled, too lost to speak? It's because when you name the unspoken, you don't just share information. You create liberation. You lift a weight they didn't even realize they were carrying. You show them, you are not alone. You are not invisible. You are not crazy. And in that moment, trust deepens. Walls crumble. Transformation begins. Let me take you into a story. Her name was Sophia, a quiet soul, carrying invisible wounds through a glittering world that rarely noticed. On the outside, she was composed, professional, even admired. But underneath, a storm raged. One afternoon, sitting across from a counselor she barely knew, Sophia found herself fumbling for words, trying to explain an exhaustion, a sadness she couldn't quite name. She tripped over explanations, minimized her pain, laughed it off, until the counselor, in a voice so soft it almost broke the air, said, "It sounds like you've spent your whole life being strong for everyone else. And somewhere along the way, you forgot you were allowed to be cared for too." Sophia froze. The truth of it hit her harder than any long analysis could have. Tears came, sudden, unstoppable. Not because she was weak, but because, finally, someone had named the unspeakable thing, and in doing so, had freed her. Here's the truth. Everyone you meet is carrying something unsaid. A hope, a fear, a longing, a shame. Most will never tell you outright. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't yet have the words, or the courage, or the hope that someone will actually listen. But if you listen between the lines, if you feel beneath the conversations, you will sense it. And if, with tenderness and humility, you dare to speak what they cannot, you create a moment they will never forget. Because in that moment, they feel seen, fully, finally. And when someone feels that seen, their heart opens to you, in ways it never would have through arguments, logic, or persuasion tricks. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the times when someone named something inside you, before you even understood it yourself. A teacher, a friend, a stranger. How did it feel? Shocking, maybe, tender, frightening, relieving. That moment of being seen, of being named, is one of the most sacred gifts you can offer another soul. And it is one of the rarest keys to true influence. You may be wondering, how do you speak the unspoken without overstepping, without assuming, without violating someone's tender, hidden world? It starts with humility and deep, compassionate listening. You don't impose your interpretation. You offer it gently, tentatively, as an invitation, not a declaration. You say, "It seems like there's a part of you that feels unseen. I wonder if there's a deeper hope you haven't had the space to say yet. It sounds like there's more pain underneath that than you're letting show." You speak with softness, with openness, with reverence for their vulnerability. And if you're wrong, you let them correct you, gratefully, gracefully, because the goal is not to be right. The goal is to offer the courage of seeing. Let me ask you something. What would shift in your relationships if you became the kind of person who could speak the hidden truths with kindness and with love? How many locked hearts could you gently open? How many silent burdens could you help lift? Because when you dare to name the unspoken, you don't just influence someone's thinking. You touch the place where real transformation lives. Emotional and practical takeaway. Speaking the unspoken is not about showing off insight. It's about offering sanctuary. When you name what someone cannot yet say, you give them the gift of being fully seen. And when people feel seen, they trust, they open, they grow. Be brave enough, and gentle enough, to name the truths hiding in the spaces between words. And you will find that your influence deepens beyond anything you ever imagined. Because you will no longer just be heard. You will be felt. Chapter 16. When to speak and when to stay silent. Mastering the timing of influence. There's a rhythm to every conversation. A pulse you can feel, if you're willing to listen. You may be wondering, why do some words land like a spark that ignites change, while others, even the wisest words, fall flat, unnoticed? It's not just what you say. It's when you say it. Because timing is everything. And mastering the timing of influence is what separates the good communicators from the unforgettable ones. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman named Eliana. She worked as a crisis negotiator, a job where every word, every silence, could mean life or death. When Eliana first began, she thought persuasion was about speaking quickly, about filling the air with reassurance, logic, hope. But she learned the hard way that rushing words into the wrong moment often made things worse. One night, standing on a rooftop with a young man ready to jump, she felt it. The overwhelming urge to speak, to save him, to pull him back with words. But something deeper inside whispered, "Not yet." And so she stood there, silent, present, waiting. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, without looking at her, the young man whispered, "You're not trying to fix me." It wasn't a question. It was a realization. A crack in the armor. And only then, gently, Eliana spoke. Not with force. Not with panic. But with words that entered a heart already beginning, finally, to open. He stepped back from the ledge. And Eliana understood something that would shape the rest of her life. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is wait. Here's the truth. Words spoken too soon fall on closed ears. Words spoken too late miss the window where the heart was ready. But words spoken in the right moment are lightning. They crack open darkness. They ignite change. Timing isn't about manipulation. It's about attunement. It's about feeling the hidden currents of emotion beneath the surface and moving with them, not against them. Let's pause for a moment. Think about your own life. Moments when someone said exactly what you needed to hear, at exactly the right time. It probably wasn't the most eloquent thing. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't flashy. It was simply true and perfectly timed. That is the power of emotional timing. It's not about perfect words. It's about perfect presence. You may be wondering, how do you master the timing of influence? It begins with patience, with the willingness to feel more than you think. You watch, you listen, you sense when the heart across from you tightens, and when it softens. You learn to wait until the soil is ready, before you plant the seed. And sometimes, you recognize that silence is the most powerful thing you can offer. A silence that says, "I see you. I'm not here to control you. I trust you enough to hold space for your truth." And from that silence, when the right moment blooms, your words can fall like rain into open earth and grow. Let me ask you something. What if you stopped measuring the success of a conversation by how much you said, and started measuring it by how much the other heart could feel? What would change in the way you speak? In the way you listen? In the way you lead? Because when you honor timing, you stop forcing influence, and you start allowing it. Emotional and practical takeaway. Mastering influence is not about flooding the space with words. It's about learning the emotional rhythm and moving with it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Wait, sense, trust the timing, and when the moment opens, speak with a voice that doesn't just fill the air, but fills the soul. Because the right words, at the right moment, can change everything. Chapter 17. Anchoring your words in emotion. The secret to lasting impact. People rarely remember what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel. You may be wondering, if facts fade, if arguments dissolve, what truly endures in the heart and mind? It's emotion. Always emotion. And if you want your words to leave a mark, not just for a moment, but for a lifetime, you must anchor them in feeling. Let me take you into a story. There was a teacher named Mrs. Lang. She didn't have fancy technology in her classroom. She didn't have the most cutting-edge curriculum. But her students, years later, would say that her words had shaped them more than any textbook ever could. When asked how she did it, Mrs. Lang smiled and said, I don't just teach information. I teach feelings. She would tell stories that stirred hearts. She would share vulnerabilities that built bridges. She would create experiences that tethered lessons to deep, human emotions. Moments of wonder, of triumph, of heartbreak, of laughter. And because of that, her words lived on long after the bell rang. They became part of her students' inner world. Not because they memorized facts, but because they felt something real. Here's the truth. Emotion is the glue that memory clings to. Without it, your words slip away, like sand through open fingers. But when you anchor your words in emotion, they lodge in the heart. They grow roots in the soul. And they guide decisions, beliefs, actions. Long after the conversation has ended. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the speeches, the conversations, the books, the moments that shaped your life. Was it the data, the logic, the perfectly structured arguments? Or was it something else? Something that made your chest tighten, your spirit lift, your tears rise unexpectedly? You don't remember the bullet points. You remember the feeling. Always the feeling. You may be wondering, how do you anchor your words in emotion without manipulating? It starts with authenticity. Speak from a real place inside yourself. Share stories that matter to you. Show your own human edges, your hopes, your fears, your struggles. And when you invite others into that realness, they don't just hear your words. They feel your heart. You can also use vivid, sensory language that paints a picture. Tell stories instead of listing facts. A tap into universal emotions. Fear, love, hope, loss, longing. A pause at emotional moments to let the feeling land. You're not creating drama. You're creating connection. You're saying, this is real. This matters. This is worth feeling. And that invitation is irresistible. Let me ask you something. The next time you have something important to say, will you aim only for their mind? Or will you aim for their heart? Because when the heart is moved, the mind follows. The memory lasts. The change endures. Emotional and practical takeaway. Facts fade. Feelings stay. If you want your words to matter, anchor them in emotion. Speak not just to inform, but to transform. Because a heart stirred is a life shifted. And that is how your influence will echo long after the words themselves are forgotten. Chapter 18. Leaving people better. The ultimate test of your influence. There's a silent question that echoes after every encounter you have. A question you may never hear aloud, but that lives in the heart of the other person. It asks, am I stronger or smaller because of you? You may be wondering, what if true persuasion wasn't about whether you convinced someone, but about whether you left them better? Not better because they surrendered. Not better because they agreed. But better because your presence awakened something inside them that had been waiting to rise. Let me take you into a story. There was an old storyteller named Malik. He traveled from village to village, sharing parables, riddles, songs. People would gather by firelight, not because they needed more information, but because something about Malik made them feel more alive. He didn't argue. He didn't debate. He didn't impose. He invited. And after he left, something lingered. Not just the stories. Not just the laughter. But a quiet sense of expansion. People stood a little taller. Dreamed a little wider. Loved a little more bravely. It wasn't magic. It wasn't manipulation. It was the way Malik carried himself. With humility. With reverence for the soul of every person he encountered. He didn't use influence to take from people. He used it to give. And because of that, he was unforgettable. Here's the truth. Real persuasion is not measured by how many arguments you win. It's measured by how many hearts you lift. When people leave your presence, are they more aligned with their own strength? More awake to their own potential? More free to walk their own true path? Or do they feel manipulated, cornered, shrunken? Because if you've taken something from them, you haven't persuaded. You've stolen. But if you've given something to them, Even if it was just a moment of clarity, a breath of hope, a spark of self-belief, then you have practiced the highest art of influence. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the people whose words stayed with you for years. The ones who shaped your path long after they were gone. Were they the loudest voices? The most aggressive? The most insistent? Or were they the ones who, in a single moment, helped you see yourself a little more clearly, a little more tenderly, a little more courageously? That is the echo of true persuasion. It's not domination. It's liberation. You may be wondering, how can you begin to leave people better after every conversation? It's not about grand gestures. It's about small choices. A listen longer than you speak. A speak to the highest part of someone, not the lowest. A offer encouragement without attachment. A challenge gently, when needed, but always with respect. A leave room for people to own their own growth. And most importantly, hold this silent prayer in your heart. May this person leave stronger because I was here. Not may they agree with me. Not may they admire me. Not may they need me. Simply, may they leave stronger. Let me ask you something. What if every encounter, every conversation, was an opportunity to leave a blessing behind? What if your words, your presence, became seeds planted quietly in the soil of other souls? Seeds that might grow long after you are gone? Because when you make that your measure, when you let service, not ego, guide your persuasion, you become something far more powerful than influential. You become unforgettable, emotional and practical takeaway. The real measure of persuasion is not whether you win, it's whether you lift. Leave people better than you found them, more courageous, more awake, more themselves. Because in the end, it's not the cleverness of your words that matters. It's the strength you leave behind in their hearts. And that is the legacy of true influence. Chapter 19. Becoming a living invitation. The final mastery of persuasion. At the highest level, persuasion stops being about strategy. It stops being about words. It becomes a way of being. You may be wondering, what if the ultimate power to influence others was not in what you said, but in who you are? Because when your life becomes an invitation, when your presence alone calls others towards something higher, you no longer need to convince. You simply live. And people feel it. Let's step into a story. There was an elder named Honoris, who lived at the edge of a small mountain village. She rarely spoke at meetings. She never fought to be heard. She didn't need to. When challenges arose, when conflicts raged, when fear filled the air, it was Honoris the people turned to. Not because she demanded it, but because her life, the way she listened, the way she moved, the way she chose her words so sparingly and so wisely, was an invitation to calm, to wisdom, to courage. People trusted her not because she shouted her truth, but because she embodied it. And through her, others found their own. Honoris didn't persuade by force. She persuaded by being. Here's the truth. At the deepest level, persuasion is not something you do to others. It's something you awaken in others. Simply by standing fully in your own light. Your peace invites others to soften their fear. Your clarity invites others to find their own. Your courage invites others to step into theirs. You don't have to pull people. You don't have to push them. You become a magnet, a living mirror of what's possible. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the people who shaped your spirit most. The ones you didn't just listen to. You wanted to be more like them. What was it? Not their arguments. Not their charisma. Not their cleverness. It was something quieter, deeper. It was the way they lived. The way they stood. The way they carried a kind of wholeness you could feel. That is the final mastery of persuasion. Not speaking, being. You may be wondering, how do you become a living invitation? It's not about perfection. It's not about performance. It's about alignment. When your values, your actions, your words, and your energy all sing the same song, people feel it. You live what you believe. You embody what you speak. You forgive faster. You listen deeper. You move more slowly, more intentionally. And without trying, without needing to prove anything, you become someone who lights fires just by walking into a room. You become someone whose presence lingers long after you leave. Not because you dazzled, not because you conquered, but because you lived with such quiet authenticity that others remembered who they were when they stood near you. Let me ask you something. What would happen if you stopped trying to persuade and simply became the kind of soul whose life was persuasion enough? What would happen if you trusted that your truest influence lies not in force, but in freedom? Because the ultimate mastery of persuasion is becoming an invitation to others to rise into their own light. Emotional and practical takeaway. At the final level, persuasion is no longer about tactics. It's about presence. Your life becomes your message. Your energy becomes your voice. Your integrity becomes your power. Live aligned. Love deeply. Stand true. And you will find that the influence you carry cannot be faked, cannot be stolen, cannot be denied. You will become a living invitation. And that is the art of persuasion, perfected. Final reflections. The quiet power you now carry. If you've made it this far, something inside you has already shifted. You may not feel it yet. Or maybe you do. Like a quiet river, moving stronger beneath the surface of your life. You understand now that persuasion was never about clever words. It was never about domination. It was never about getting your way. It was always about connection, about truth, about service. The power to influence others with integrity is the power to touch lives without taking from them, to lead without forcing, to inspire without controlling. It's the power to make people stronger after knowing you. Let's pause for a final moment. Look back over the path you've walked through these chapters. You've learned how real persuasion starts inside you, with your presence, your energy, your courage to live aligned with your deepest truths. You've learned that listening, waiting, feeling, and speaking from love are not just techniques. They are transformations of your soul. You've learned that silence can speak louder than speeches, that questions can unlock more doors than commands, that being fully present can move mountains that words alone never could. You've discovered that you are already carrying everything you need. The only task left is to live it. Let me ask you something. What kind of legacy will your conversations leave? What kind of strength will your presence awaken in others? What kind of fire will your life quietly ignite? You now hold the quiet power, the sacred power of influence with integrity. Use it well. Use it gently. Use it in service of something greater than yourself. Because the world is full of people shouting, full of people fighting to be heard. But what it needs, what it longs for, is someone like you. Someone who can reach out, not with fists, but with open hands. Someone who can speak, not to overpower, but to awaken. Someone whose words, and whose life, are an invitation to rise. Final closing line. The art of persuasion is not about bending others to your will. It's about standing so firmly in your own light that others remember they have light inside them too. Go now, carry that light, and watch how the world, quietly, begins to glow.